Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name's Alex Muro from Undergraduate Financial Aid, and we have quite a few people registered for this evening's session or afternoon, depending on where you are. We are going to wait just a couple more minutes before we get started. Wait for some more people to join. So thank you for your patience, and thank you for joining us. We'll give it just one more minute. Okay, we'll get started. Welcome again. My name is Alex Muro. I'm Senior Associate Director here in Undergraduate Financial Aid at Yale, and thank you for joining us this evening or afternoon for those of you in the western half of the country. I'm joined today by a few of my colleagues, Katie, Rondell, Tony, Nicole, Taylor, and then you'll also be hearing from my colleagues, Sarah and Nick, to get into the meat of our presentation, which will be about outside scholarships and loans. Just a couple housekeeping items. The chat has been disabled. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop those into the Q&A, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. My colleagues behind the scenes are going to answer those questions as we go along. But if there's a recurring theme, something that a lot of you want to know about, we might save that for the end, or one of the presenters will address that live. This webinar, as well as our previous webinar, maybe some of you were with us 2 weeks ago, are on our YouTube channel, or this webinar will be on our YouTube channel, and you can link to that from the presentations and publications page on our website, and we'll share that URL throughout the presentation, especially at the end. And just to recap that previous webinar a couple weeks ago, we covered the cost of attendance, both the expenses that Yale bills you for and the ones that it doesn't, comparing the financial aid offer, that letter that came out from our office, versus the bill that you'll be receiving next week, and refunds as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So if we could have the next slide, please. All right, thank you. So there are multiple ways to contact our office. You can send us an email, undergrad.fa@yale.edu. You can give us a call. Our general office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, or feel free to drop by and visit us. We hope to see many of you in a couple months. Once the fall semester begins and orientation activities move in, definitely an exciting time on campus. We're right on the edge of campus behind Timothy Dwight College, 246 Church Street here in downtown New Haven. Personal financial aid counselor, this is our part of our customer service model. So this is intended to be your primary contact with our office, and every student who receives financial aid from Yale College has been assigned a personal financial aid counselor. You should have received an email a couple weeks ago introducing you to who your counselor is. But do know that there are those other ways of contacting us too, sending us an email, giving us a call, dropping by. You don't only have to talk to your counselor, but one of the reasons behind that counselor model is to give you like a personal contact, someone who is going to help you navigate the financial aid process at Yale across all 4 years. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Sarah Badan, who's going to talk to you about outside scholarships.
Thank you, Alex. Good evening. Again, my name is Sarah Badan, and I will be providing an overview of the outside scholarship policies and practices at Yale. I will be covering a variety of information that will hopefully address the most common questions that we tend to receive about outside scholarships. Next slide, please. There are two different types of outside resources. What is an outside scholarship? So that is merit-based funding from an external resource that is not from Yale or the federal government. The other type is what is referred to as an entitlement grant. So, for example, something from the federal government, a state grant, or similar types of agencies. There are also tuition benefits that are benefits that would be, or resources that would be provided typically by a parent's employer. Next slide, please. Next, we'll talk about how to report these various resources. There was an email that was sent to students on June 16th with some information about the outside scholarship process, in addition to a form that we have students complete in order to report the outside scholarship information. Before I go further, I would like to note that with outside scholarships, there is an impact to your financial aid offer itself, in addition to an impact to the bill, and those are two different types of adjustments. So for this first part, I'm going to walk you through how to complete our outside scholarship form and what to report on it. So first of all, on this form, you do not need to report the federal Pell Grant or loans. The Questbridge and Yale Scholarship or any Yale affiliated scholarship does not need to be reported on this form. If you receive VA or ROTC, you do not need to report that either. We do have a designated specialist in our office that will work with you in addition to other colleagues around the university. You do need to report scholarships regardless of who the funds are sent to, whether that be directly to the student or the university. I would also like to note that it is not necessary to report a scholarship for which you do not know what the amount is yet. For example, students that receive Jack Kent Cooke or Gates scholarships, since you don't know that amount, you do not need to report it on this form. Next slide, please. So this is the first part of our outside scholarship form. Students can actually see this in their list of requirements in Yale Hub. Really, this first part is just filling out kind of basic information. The student ID number, that is your Yale student ID number. It starts with a 9 and was listed on your financial aid offer letter. So that is what you would reference in that particular field. There are some disclosures to complete on here. And then a little further down, you're going to indicate if you're reporting a new scholarship, canceling one, or making any type of adjustment. That is what those 3 checkboxes are at the bottom of this page. Next slide, please. So this is really the meat of the form. I'm going to go over each column that you see here because I've been receiving a lot of questions about that. In the first column where it says name of the scholarship or resource, you're just putting literally the name of the scholarship. So that could be the ABC scholarship. The resource type, you are indicating if it's an outside scholarship. Tuition benefits are also reported on this form, and that is also an option in that particular drop-down menu. The awarding agency. So sometimes another agency may be sending the actual payment to the university, for example. So maybe the ABC scholarship has their funds sent from Bank of America. So Bank of America is what you would indicate as your awarding agency. The amount that you are going to report there is going to be applicable to the fall term, the spring term, or the entire academic year, meaning fall and spring. The renewable drop-down menu. You're gonna indicate this is either a one-time scholarship or renewable. Renewable means that you are expecting to receive this scholarship in a future academic year. Just like applying for financial aid, you would fill out this form on an annual basis each academic year. The payment schedule will either be a single payment, meaning the agency is going to send the entire amount in one check that's either going to come entirely in the fall or entirely in the spring. The other option would be two payments, meaning half is coming in the fall and half is coming in the spring. And that last box there, you're just indicating whether it's being paid to the university or being paid directly to the student. Anything that is paid directly to the university will be reflected on the bill in Yale Pay. Next slide, please. Agency verification requirements. So some external agencies require verification forms or certain types of paperwork to be completed to satisfy any of their requirements for the scholarship. Sometimes it may need to come to Yale and someone either in financial aid or possibly the registrar's office or both may need to complete those forms. For our purposes, you can submit those forms through our Yale document upload tool. Make sure that you are always keeping in line with any deadlines that they may have, that you're completing all of the steps that you need to follow. Also look carefully at the form. The student may need to complete a portion and then either financially or the registrar needs to complete the second piece of it. It is also your responsibility to be monitoring the status of the payment that is sent to Yale. I also want to note that some larger agencies, such as National Merit, for example, will send a student roster to the university that people in our office will review and process. Next slide. Okay, for this first part, we're going to talk about how outside scholarships impact your financial aid offer itself. So if you recall from your financial aid offer letter, there was a student share. So outside scholarships can first replace the standard student share. So for domestic students, that would be $3,700. For international, it's $2,100. As I said, outside scholarships first reduce the student share, followed by reducing Yale scholarship dollar for dollar. It does not reduce the parent share. However, as I said, the bill is a different type of adjustment and it can help reduce your bill if you need it to do so. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of what those adjustments look like. So in this first example, Jada is receiving an Elks scholarship for $1,000. That is going to reduce her student share from $3,700 to $2,700. In the case of Eric, he has a $5,000 National Hispanic Scholarship. The first $3,700 is going to reduce that student share to 0. And then the Yale scholarship will be reduced by the remaining $1,300. And for the purpose of these examples, we are using a standard student share for a domestic student. If any in the group receive a Sterling scholarship, that actually reduces your student share right off the bat by $2,000. So any outside scholarships after that, you'd really be starting at a standard student share of $1,700. Also, students that are participating in the Yale FSY program, for 1 year only, your student share is getting reduced by $1,600. So again, you're starting at a lower amount when these adjustments are being made. Next slide, please. So now we're going to briefly talk about the bill a little bit. So if the funds are sent directly to Yale, they will be applied like any other payment would be. They will first be applied against any outstanding balance that is on your student account. If there is an excess, meaning a credit, you may either request a refund and use those funds towards other expenses, or it can remain on the student account and be applied towards future charges. Within Yale Hub, there is a student accounts menu where you would submit a refund request. Our office is not involved with processing any type of refund or applying payments to the account. You should be directing these agencies to send their payment to the PO box for the student accounts office. You need to reference your Yale student ID number on it, in addition to the applicable term and academic year that the payment should be applied to. Also, it is at the agency's discretion how those funds are going to be sent, meaning a lump sum versus 2 payments. Some larger scholarships might be sent in a lump sum that's applied to the fall term, leaving a large credit. If you need any portion of that credit to be applied towards spring to reduce those charges, then definitely be cautious before you take a refund off of your account, because you could end up owing money later on if you needed those funds to reduce another balance due. Next slide. Next, we will be going over technology reimbursement. So there are certain criteria that must be met in order for students to qualify for the technology reimbursement. First of all, you need to have outside scholarships that exceed your standard student share. I mentioned that before, and it's noted here, $3,700 for domestic students, $2,100 for international students. Also, you must confirm with your outside agencies that they will allow their funding to be used towards the cost of a computer. This can be submitted one time, and it doesn't have to necessarily be your first year, but one time during your 4 years at Yale. And there is a designated cap for the amount of reimbursement that you may be able to receive. Noted here for Gates scholars, if you pursue any kind of technology reimbursement through Gates, they have a cap of $2,000. The Jack Kent Cook scholarship actually has 2 tiers. So STEM scholars, they have a cap of $2,500 and $1,800 for all other majors. And then otherwise, in general, for all other outside scholarships, the cap is $2,500. The purchase must be made out of pocket, and then you would submit receipts to our office for reimbursement. Next slide, please. So again, here are some examples of how this technology reimbursement process works. Again, we have Jada. She has an outside scholarship for $1,000, which again only reduced her student share to $2,700. She does not have outside scholarships that exceed her standard student share, so she is ineligible for the technology reimbursement. In the case of Eric, he had the $5,000 scholarship from the National Hispanic Scholarship and wants to buy a $1,500 laptop. Well, his eligibility for the technology reimbursement is going to depend on how much the Yale scholarship is being reduced. So in this example, the first $3,700 for the standard student share is reduced to zero. And then he can be reimbursed for a maximum of $1,300 for the laptop, because that is the amount that the Yale scholarship is being reduced. Next, we have Micah. Micah receives a $10,000 Coca-Cola scholarship and spends $2,500 on various technology purchases. A portion of that $10,000 is going to reduce the student share to zero. He will be able to access $2,500 for the technology reimbursement. And then the remaining $3,800 from that $10,000 is going to still be reducing your Yale scholarship dollar for dollar. Next slide, please. Can outside scholarships be used to cover other expenses? The answer is it depends. It must be a reasonable educational expense. The outside agency, again, it must be within their policy to cover the type of expense that's being requested. In addition, it must be a reasonable expense that is in adherence with any sort of institutional or financial aid policies as well. So for example, Yale health coverage or additional travel, those are examples of what we would consider to be reasonable educational expenses. If the outside agency is willing to cover those expenses, they just need to provide a document in writing to our office that indicates that. These will be approved on a case basis, and the process is basically the same as the technology reimbursement that we just discussed. Next slide, please. Finally, this last slide is just talking about summer. Summer 2026 is still considered part of the 2025-2026 academic year. However, it is treated entirely as its own separate term. So your regular academic year is fall and spring, and then summer is treated separately. There is some funding available to students to help cover summer costs and outside scholarships, if the agency allows their funding to be used towards summer, can help cover some of those expenses as well. There isn't any sort of student share adjustment for the summer. The agency, again, must indicate in writing and also on any payments that it is specifically for summer, and your eligibility would be the financial aid cost of attendance, minus other summer resources that you may have access to. I wanted to mention this more to students that tend to have very large scholarships, so they're having that reduction to the Yale scholarship during the regular academic year. You can work with your agency to actually defer funding either to future years or even use part of it towards summer to kind of maximize your use of the outside scholarship. And that is the end of my presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. So my name is Nick Rendon. I'm an assistant director here in Undergraduate Financial Aid, and today we're going to go over what educational loans are, what they can be used for, choosing which loan type is best for you, how to apply, and then repayment options. Next slide. All right, so what are educational loans and what can they be used for? So educational loans are loans that are borrowed from federal and or private lenders that the student and or their parents can borrow to cover college-related expenses such as tuition, fees, housing, meals, books, supplies, and then miscellaneous and personal expenses. Education loans need to be paid back, and they can be paid back right away, or you can defer repayment until after you graduate. So today we're going to cover the two big types of loans for education, federal and private, and we'll touch more on those in the next slide. So what is loan interest and how does it work? So interest is defined as a fee that lenders charge a borrower for borrowing money. And then interest is usually expressed as a percentage of the amount of the loan you borrow. So like any other type of loan that you would borrow, educational loans have a principal balance, which is the amount of the loan that you borrowed, and then monthly interest that is charged on this balance and accrues. So there are two different types of interest. We have fixed and variable. So fixed means that the interest rate for the loan is fixed until the loan balance is paid off in full. And then variable interest fluctuates over time because it's tied to the underlying benchmark interest rate or index that changes periodically. Next slide, please. All right, so types of loans, federal and private loans. So federal loan offered by the U.S. Department of Education, the students and their biological or adoptive parents. Students and parents must be U.S. citizens or permanent residents, and the student must be enrolled at least half-time, which is 1.5 or more Yale credits. And then for private loans, those are available through banks, credit unions, and then online lenders. Most lenders offer private student loans to U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and international students. And then finally, students and their biological and adoptive parents can apply for private loans. Undergraduate students who apply for private student loans will need to apply for this loan with a cosigner, who is typically a parent or a family member with established credit and is willing to repay the private student loan if the student is unable to. So in general, the cosigner borrower is required to be a U.S. citizen. Next slide, please. All right, so choosing which loans are best for you. So let's start with the pros and cons of federal loans. So the pros of federal loans is that they have fixed interest rates, flexible repayment options, and no early repayment penalties. Some cons of federal loans. So the interest rates for federal loans this year have dropped a little from last academic year, but they may still be a little bit more higher than some private loan interest rates. So currently the federal student loan interest rate is 6.39%, and for the federal parent plus loan, it's 8.94%. So all federal loans, this is another con, have loan processing fees, otherwise known as origination fees, that is assessed by the U.S. Department of Education. So this fee is a percentage of the total loan borrowed and reduces the amount of the loan that is credited to the student's account. So just keep in mind, you have to factor in these origination fees when you're borrowing these loans, these federal loans. So let's go to the next slide and talk about the pros and cons of private loans. So the pros of private loans is they have competitive interest rates for borrowers with good credit. There are no borrowing limits if you're approved. And if you are approved, you can borrow for multiple academic years and lock in your interest rate. Some cons of private loans. So there are fewer repayment options for these loans. They do require undergraduate students to apply with a cosigner and borrower, as we discussed earlier. And there is a wide range of interest rates if you are approved. And generally, the cosigner needs to be a U.S. citizen. Next slide, please. So how do you apply for these loans? So let's talk about federal loans first. And this process is a little bit different at Yale. So in general, when applying for a federal loan, a student must submit the FAFSA and complete their financial aid application requirements posted in their Yale HUD. And then the student or parent needs to submit the federal student and/or parent loan request form that can be found on our website, not on federal student aid. Now let's take a look at each of these request forms, so the federal parent and federal student loans. And please note that these loans for the upcoming academic year, starting this August, will be posted to our website sometime next week. So they're not yet available yet. So for the federal student loan request form here, students need to log into the form with their Yale Net ID and password, enter their name, their student ID, and Yale email address, and then select their class level. Once you do that, the amount that you'd like to borrow will be based on your class level and will, show up below. And then you can then sign and submit the form. And then one thing to note for first-time federal student loan borrowers is you will need to complete entrance counseling and a master promissory note. So entrance counseling and master promissory notes can be completed through the Federal Student Aid website, which is the same website that you completed your FAFSA through. So in general, entrance counseling is not how it sounds. It's more like a guided questionnaire that's meant to help borrowers understand their responsibilities of taking out a loan. And then the master promissory note is essentially the agreement to repay that. And this can all be completed electronically. So let's go to the next slide and take a look at our Parent Plus loan request form. So for this form, the Yale student must initiate the request, not the parent. So to do that, the student logs into the form with their Yale Net ID and password, enters the parent borrower's name and email address, and then an email will be sent to the parent borrower to complete the federal parent loan application that you can see on the next slide. So here is the federal parent loan request form. So once the email is sent to the parent borrower, there's going to be a link embedded in that email where you can go click on it, create an account with the email that the form was sent to you with. And then you can complete the form similar to how the student completed their federal student loan request form if they submitted one. So here, the parent borrower will enter their generic information like their name, their social security number, address, contact information, stuff like that. And then select the amount that they'd like to borrow before signing and submitting the form. So for federal parent loan borrowers, they will need to sign a master promissory note for every federal parent loan that they are approved for. So for these loans, you do have to apply each year if you are interested in the Federal Parent Plus loan. And then for students, you do need to submit subsequent years federal student loan request forms. So in general, it takes about 3 to 4 business days for federal student and federal parent loan funds to credit the student Yale Pay account once all the loan requirements are met. So just for those, it's the master promissory note and the entrance counseling for the federal student loan. And then, as we just discussed, the master promissory note for the federal parent plus loan. Now let's transition to applying for private loans. So we recommend researching private loan options on our website, which has lots of great information on loan options, interest rates, and best practices. We also have a very useful tool through Elm Select, which is a third-party website that Yale, along with other universities in the US, pay for to help consolidate all of our lenders that Yale families have borrowed through in the past 3 years. And we'll take a look at that website later. So once you've done your research for private loans and narrowed down the amount of the loan that you want to apply for to 3 or 4 different loans, we recommend applying through each lender's website at the same time. And then if you're approved, it's recommended to compare and contrast the different loan interest rates and repayment terms, and then select the loan that is best for you and complete all the paperwork for that loan within a 30-day period. Because if you wait longer than that, you will have multiple impacts to your credit report, which is similar to like shopping when you're shopping for like mortgages and car loans. So we definitely recommend following through with at least one of those private loan applications. And then for private loans, similar to federal loans, it takes anywhere from like 3 to 5 business days for private loan funds to credit your Yale Pay student account. So let's take a look at our Elm Select website. So here you'll see Yale's Elm Select website, which you can navigate to from the loans or the financing options web page on our website. So this is a comprehensive list of all private loans that Yale students and their families have borrowed from in the past 3 years, and allows borrowers and researchers to compare and contrast the different interest rates and repayment terms within the website. So please note, if you do decide to use this website, that you are not required to borrow a loan from this list. You can borrow from another lender if you have like a working relationship with a bank that offers student and or parent educational loans. Now let's talk about some repayment options. So all federal and most private loans allow borrowers to defer repayment until after graduation, or the student drops below half-time enrollment, whichever comes first. So half-time enrollment, as we discussed earlier, is 1.5 credits or less in a given academic year. So there are a variety of repayment options available to students and parents for federal loans, but there is legislation in the works that will change federal loan repayment plans, and we recommend keeping an eye on updates for these as well. And then finally, for private loans, they tend to offer limited repayment options with fixed monthly repayments, anywhere from 5 to 20 years in length. And it is important to note that private lenders typically only offer borrowers 1 or 2 fixed repayment options. All right, so let's go over a scenario here where a student is interested in using an educational loan to offset or cover out-of-pocket educational expenses. So to recap what educational loans can be used for, these are tuition, fees, housing, meals, books, and supplies, including a laptop. So let's play out this scenario where a student wants to purchase a laptop, but does not have the cash needed to purchase it. So the student can either purchase the laptop with a credit card or an educational loan. Credit card interest rates are variable and currently average around 25%. And a minimum monthly payment is required the same month that you purchase. And then the current academic year federal student loan interest rate is 6.39%. However, repayment for federal student loans can be deferred until after graduation. So if a student were to use a federal student loan to pay for a laptop, the following must apply to the student's account. So they must have a zero balance in Yale Pay, their Yale Pay student account, and they have not used all of their federal student loan eligibility for the academic year. So these apply to your situation, and you want to use a federal student loan to cover the expense of this laptop. You can request a federal student loan using our request form that we took a look at earlier. Then have the loan funds applied to your Yale Pay student account in 3 to 4 business days once you've satisfied those federal loan requirements, the entrance counseling and the master promissory note. And then you can request a direct deposit refund through your Yale Hub to offset or cover or even reimburse the cost of your laptop. So to recap on the next slide, everything we went over today, federal and private educational loans need to be paid back. They have varying interest rates, repayment options, and qualifications. And then federal and private loans both have their pros and cons. And we recommend starting your research on our website. So again, to recap, all this information can be found on the finaid.yale.edu/financing options website. And the federal loan request forms will be available on that website sometime next week. So now I'll hand it off to Alex to talk about student employment and resources for families at Yale.
All right. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Sarah, for all that terrific information. The focus of today's presentation was ways for students to cover their student share, which in most cases is the $3,700 figure for domestic students, $2,100 for international. Yes, outside scholarships and loans are means to do that, but there's also working. We don't want to discount that option. The reason that you'll only see this one slide about working is because that's not a process that our office is directly involved in. So just a few key points about student employment. All positions are posted on the Student Employment Office website where students can apply online. And on the next slide, I'll show you the link to that website. Right now, if you were to go on that website, you would see primarily summer jobs, term time jobs. That's the term we use, no pun intended, to refer to the fall and spring semesters. You'll probably see those start to be posted toward the end of next month and certainly into August. Please know that students are not placed into positions. During academic terms, there's a limit of 19 hours a week that a student can work, and this refers to on-campus jobs. During breaks, that goes up to 40 hours. Our current minimum hourly wage is that mandated by the state of Connecticut, $16.35. That resets every January 1st. It's indexed to inflation. We often get a question like, what if I get a job on campus? Is that a way that I can pay my bill, that I can pay my tuition? And the answer to that is not really, because unlike your financial aid, which credits in full for that semester at the start of the semester, on-campus jobs at Yale are like any other job. You're paid as you work. In most cases, weekly, sometimes semi-monthly. It's not paid through Yale Pay. Typically, it's by direct deposit into your personal bank account. So a great way to pay for like those books and personal expenses that the student share is intended to cover. Not really a great way to pay your tuition. And just to be clear, working on campus is an option. Students receiving financial aid are not required to work. And if you do want to work, you don't have to work on campus. You can also work off campus in the community. Another question we get is, well, am I at some point going to be penalized? Like, let's say, is there an amount above which my earnings might reduce the amount of aid for which I would otherwise qualify? And the answer to that is yes. However, that's a really big number. And by big, I'm talking in the $15,000 to $20,000 range. So if you're working and you're earning that much, I'd say good for you. I mean, maybe focus a little bit more on your studies, but with all due seriousness, that's not generally an issue for students. Next slide, please. So here are some of the websites that we've referenced throughout this presentation. Our own website, of course, we want to champion that first. The financial literacy resource that we covered primarily in the previous webinar, but we always want to promote that because the more be an informed consumer, right? It applies to financial aid just like it does other aspects in life. Yale Student Employment, very simple URL there, yalestudentjobs.org. Yale Hub, which is where, as Sarah mentioned, you can link to that outside scholarship resource form. And then student accounts and Yale Pay. I've seen, there have been questions about where do I mail my scholarship check? How do I access Yale Pay? Well, the links to do that can be found through the student accounts and Yale Pay site. And if we could advance to what I believe is the final slide, this is where we like to end up. You can find us online. We just revamped our website. We're really proud of it. So if you checked it out a few months ago and you're like, this is really dense and hard to navigate, we've really put a lot of effort into improving this resource for you. And you can find links to a lot of the information that we cover today, links to our colleagues in other offices. And just a few things. I've been monitoring the Q&A as Sarah and Nick were talking. So a couple common themes that have come up. Yes, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel, and you can link to that from the presentations and publications page on our website. There's also, you'll find a link to the webinar that took place a couple weeks ago. There was a question about, well, my student share is 4,000, and I believe that was answered in the Q&A. Please know that, in most cases, the student share for domestic students is $3,700. There are exceptions to that, and I think that leads to a good disclaimer, which is, the information that we've provided this evening, this afternoon, is general in nature. And it does apply to your situation, but like most things, if you have a question specific to your situation, the best thing to do would be to contact our office. You can reach out to your personal financial aid counselor. You can, contact us by one of those methods that I shared before: email, phone, dropping in. Let's not have any unpleasant surprises, right? Nick mentioned the loan request forms, the federal loan request forms, that is. We do apologize for the delay in those. Those should be out very shortly. Some of you said, I saw questions about, well, hey, the bill's going out next week and you haven't even given us the opportunity to apply for loans. Yes, that's right. But do know that the bill is dynamic. It's not like a static, okay, on July 1, this is how things are. It gets updated throughout the month. So as you report outside scholarships to us, as you request loans, those will be added to the bill. You'll see them as anticipated aid. The balance due will adjust accordingly. And speaking of that, right now, students, and if you've authorized proxies, parents, guardians, or others, yeah, you can log into Yale Pay, but that bill is in the process of being assembled. So today was actually a significant day. Today is the day that tuition and other fees were first added to your account. And if you were to log in, you might say, hey, what about that letter I got in March? Where's my financial aid? Well, guess what? That goes on tomorrow. So what I would suggest doing is don't peek into Yale Pay just yet. Wait for that email communication to come out from our colleagues in student accounts, which will take place on July 1st. That's when all the pieces of the puzzle come together, and that will give you an accurate reflection of what, if any, amount is due to Yale. So with that, let's see. I'm just looking at the chat, some questions that are being fed both to me and as well as Nick and Sarah. So one for me is, let's see, Yale Health. Great. Thank you for reminding me about that, Katie. We got a lot of questions in the webinar a couple weeks ago, pardon me, about Yale Health coverage. And we let our colleagues in Yale Health know that because we want to defer to them. They're the subject matter experts. They're actually going to be putting on a couple webinars in the coming weeks about, what is covered by Yale Health, steps you might take to decide, like, do I want to retain the Yale Health coverage or do I want to waive it? Is my own coverage adequate? We are going to be sending out information about, I believe there's 3 separate webinars that they'll be having in the next month or two. So stay tuned for that. All right. So let's see. I think I actually, not to steal your thunder, Sarah, but I believe I addressed this already, which was that, what if I have a student asset contribution? What if my student share is more than that standard $3,700 amount? That would be a good example. And Sarah, feel free to chime in here if I miss anything. That would be one of those. This is general information. How does this apply specifically to me? I would say reach out to your counselor, reach out to our office, and we can tell you how the general policy we've discussed here tonight applies to your specific situation. Sarah, I am going to kick this one to you. So this is about, if you have outside scholarship, how might that lead to a refund? If you could review that again for us. And then the concept of, anticipated aid versus the actual payment to the account.
Sure. So as Alex stated just a moment ago, the bill will be sent out sometime next week. And initially, financial aid, for example, will appear as anticipated. Also, if you receive an outside scholarship that is payable to Yale, you will also ultimately see that reflected on the bill as an anticipated memo, and it will remain that way until the payment is actually received by student accounts and posted to the bill. As I said in a earlier slide, um, if an outside scholarship is paid directly to the university, that payment is sent to student accounts where it will be applied against your bill. If there are any outstanding charges, the amount will be applied against those first. And then if there is an excess, you will see a credit on the account. You may use that credit towards your other out-of-pocket expenses. So for example, maybe you want to use it towards books or some other type of unbilled expense. Um, Once there is a actual credit on the account, meaning nothing is anticipated anymore, then you will be able to access those funds by going into Yale Hub under the student accounts menu and submitting a refund request. It is important to note too that in general, financial aid doesn't actually post a year. So Yale Scholarship, for example, doesn't always post until shortly before the start of each term. And outside scholarships, we don't have any control over when the agency sends payment. So it could come potentially as late as September. What that means is you might have to make some purchases upfront and essentially reimburse yourself later by requesting a refund. Again, if a scholarship agency sends a large lump sum payment that results in a credit for the fall, if you need any portion of that funding to cover the spring bill, which will come out in November, definitely keep that in mind before you submit any type of refund request to ensure that no other issues occur on your student account. Did that address the whole question, Alex?
Yes, I think so. I think so, Sarah. And again, I've said it a couple times, I'll say it again. If you have questions specific to your situation, if you feel that the information we provided tonight does not fully answer your question, don't hesitate to reach out. Customer service, informing you, helping you to make informed decisions is a big part of what we do. So never hesitate to do that. So thank you, Sarah. We've got a couple questions about how the charge for Yale Health interacts with financial aid. So a couple things about that. So if you want to use your financial aid, your Yale scholarship pays to your Yale Pay account. That's the same account to which the health insurance is charged. So if you don't waive the coverage, effectively, your financial aid goes toward paying that and any other charges that are on your account. So you don't have to specifically request, will you allow my will you allow my financial aid to pay for this specific charge? Now, there's an important caveat. If you have a hospitalization scholarship, which is, it will say that on your financial aid offer, Yale Hospitalization Scholarship. That scholarship is specifically intended to pay for your Yale Health coverage. And we do have some students who waive the coverage thinking that, oh, well, I can pocket that cash, basically. Or maybe for some other reason. And I'm not implying that anyone does this for nefarious reasons, but please do know that that is something that we monitor, because that is a charge specifically for, or pardon me, there's a specific scholarship for that specific charge. So if you have a hospitalization scholarship and you waive the coverage, we're going to remove the scholarship from your financial aid offer, from your package. So it ends up being a wash. So I would encourage you not to do that. Let's see. I believe those are all of the open questions that my colleagues have fed to us. I do see some remaining questions being answered in the Q&A. We are going to wrap up here shortly. Like I said, feel free to reach out to us. This is being recorded. It will be posted if you want to go back and review it later at your convenience. Just going to give my colleagues here a couple moments to catch up to the Q&A. So I understand there are still some remaining questions about the refund process. So the refund that exists, your opportunity to request a refund is once all the charges on your account have been paid. And by paid, I mean not just covered with anticipated aid, but we've received all those payments, whether it's federal grants, federal loans over which we have control, our own institutional aid, or outside scholarship. Once all the Yale charges are paid and what we call a credit balance exists, your aid exceeds your charges, that is the point in time at which you can request a refund. Those are requested through Yale Hub, just like there's a financial aid module in Yale Hub. There's a student accounts module as well. I'll actually refer you to our last webinar. We covered this a couple of weeks ago toward the end of the presentation. There were some screenshots in there about where you go in Yale Hub to request a refund, where you go to set up direct deposit so that money can be transferred to you as quickly and efficiently as possible. See, there's a question about, do we offer loans? Why did I not see those in my financial aid offer to begin with? Could be part of that question. And because we want to clearly indicate what your net cost to attend Yale is, which is the cost of Yale minus the gift aid, the free money, the grants and scholarships that we offer. We offer the full suite of federal loans, as well as many private loan options, as Nick indicated. You're not limited just to what's on our Elm Select list. But that is a good starting point. All right, we're right at the hour mark, and it looks like we're going to call it a night. I do thank you all for attending. Appreciate your attention. Hopefully you found this and our previous webinar helpful. I'm just going to put a shout out. We do provide webinars throughout the year as well. Fridays with financial aid. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see there's those webinars there as well. We do plan to continue that in the upcoming academic year. I I hope you all have a good rest of the summer and look forward to seeing you all when you come to campus at the end of August. Thank you.